Oh, it's a big. Am I introducing this? Hey, everybody, welcome. We're doing another installment of Drinks and Discover with the ASAE Young Professionals Committee. This time around, we're going to talk a little bit about project and personal management. Pardon me, project and personnel management. Those are two entirely different things for the young professional. We've got several really great speakers with us today, panelists that have been in your shoes or in shoes that you're about to fill. And hopefully we'll share some tips and provide some insight to help make life a little bit easier for you. We know that this is an industry that a lot of people just kind of fall into. And so we all kind of fall into this, and then we all kind of get promoted into positions that sometimes we're not quite ready for. So it is my hope that this group today will help you work through some of those things and really hit the ground running. So we're going to start with introductions. I'm going to ask each panelist to say who they are, where they're from, and most importantly, what they're drinking. So we're going to start with Lee.
Well, I'm going to be the boring one because I'm just drinking water tonight because I forgot a bottle opener at home. So technical error on my part. But my name is Lee Maltby. I am the manager of member services and development for the State Government Affairs Council. We're located in Alexandria, Virginia. And yeah, I am excited to be a part of this panel. Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, thanks for being here. How about Sarah? A little bit about yourself.
Hi, I am Sarah Richmond Sanders. I am currently the regional chapter manager at Peak Grant Making, which is a National Association of Grants Management Professionals. And I am drinking, it looks really fancy because I put it in a really lovely glass, but it's actually Bud Light, which is my favorite, which is embarrassing, but that's the way it is. So looking forward to talking with all of you.
You know, somebody had to do it. Somebody had to drink the Bud Light, and you know what? That's fine. There's no judgment here.
Thank you. I took it out of the can at least, right?
Judgment-free zone, and none of us would have guessed if you hadn't told everybody your secret. So don't worry. Jacob, how about you? I know you're probably drinking Bud Light over there, right?
No, most certainly not. Jacob Wilder, Senior Director of Operations and Communications with the Building Owners and Managers Association of Georgia. I am a Boy Scout. I told everyone before we jumped on this call that I came prepared with 2 drinks today. I'm starting off, though, with Creature Comforts Cosmic Debris. It's a double IPA, and it is absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, so you're going to be real helpful during dinner and bedtime tonight. I know with that double IPA.
That's the goal.
Yeah. How about Mark? Why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little about yourself.
Sure. Hey, gang. Mark Franco. I'm an attorney with Whiteford, Taylor, and Preston. We're a regional law firm. We have a dedicated practice section that services mostly nonprofits. So I'm very fortunate to be part of that group. I've also spent some time on the nonprofit side. I was a director of finance and operations for a small C6 certification organization. And, I'm just happy to join this wonderful group here and try and provide some tips and whatever else might be valuable to our listeners today.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Mark.
Oh, and I'm drinking a trusty Coke Zero.
Oh, that's all right. In fact, I probably could have used your help on some of those accreditation questions on the CAE exam recently.
Oh, yeah?
So now we know for next
right.
time. Hopefully there's no next time. But all those out there that are looking for your CAE, a lot of questions like that. So make sure you talk to Mark. And then let's go to Emily, last but definitely not least. Emily.
Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Mandia. I'm a consultant here at Delcor for technology management. Prior to that, I was with MCI USA as a managing director for the Healthcare Convention and Exhibitors Association, and just so happy to share my perspective and hopefully help you guys through this journey with this great panel.
Great, thanks for joining us. So you've had a chance to meet everybody at least briefly. You'll meet them more in the next 45 minutes to an hour. So we're going to talk a little bit about project and personnel management, specifically for young professionals moving up into these positions, knowing that the boomers are going, there's not enough Gen Xers we're here, we're going to do it. We got to move into these positions. We got to lean on each other. We got to mentor each other. So before we get into what I think is probably the meatier topic of personnel management, I think let's spend some time. Let's talk about project management and perhaps budget management, knowing that a lot of times we get thrown to the wolves in that regard. So I'm going to start with Mark. Can you share some maybe tips or advice that you have for young professionals moving in this role with respect to either project management or budget management?
Sure. So the one thing that I would love to stress before I get into any details is that from my experience, both on the nonprofit side and as a legal consultant, nothing will get you in more trouble than messing up the money. Okay, you screw up anything about the finances, and you can be in big trouble. Both, from an HR perspective potentially, and from a legal perspective. So, what are some things that you can do to try and mitigate that? Well, this area is particularly a little bit difficult because there are a lot of things that you have to know when you're dealing with things like budget. The one thing that I think most professionals at this level, at the sort of what we're calling young professionals, the one thing that they're not doing enough is talking to other people. So talking to, either friends of yours, colleagues of yours, going out and networking, talking to people who may have some of the experience that you need to do the job well, or to do it at least in compliance with how it needs to be done. So, that's sort of the biggest, I think, thing that people can do from a professional training and education perspective, is just to continue to talk to as many people as you can to try and find out, because it's really hard to do a lot of studying on your own, particularly when it comes to things like finances.
Yeah, that's sage advice, and I think regardless of the topic that we could have presented today or in the future, that's like the key advice, right? It's like, let's lean on our network, let's get involved, let's hit the listservs, let's meet people, let's share. That's just really great advice to start it off, Mark. How about you, Lee? What are some tips or advice that you have for project and budget management?
Yeah, so going off of what Mark was saying, don't be afraid to ask questions. I think that one of the things that I learned early on and am very thankful for being part of an association management company early on in my career was being able to go to our team accountant and say, what the heck is this? And where am I supposed to input this? Or what does this even mean? And being able to have that open dialogue with your accounting team, especially when it comes to budgeting and all of the financial processes, is very, very important. I think that when it comes to overall project and program management, one of the things that you want to keep in mind is creating a project plan and making sure that it's a living document, so that when inevitably kinks are thrown in the works, you can adjust accordingly, but also rapidly, and make sure that you are responding in a timely and accurate manner. It's one of the things that bugs me the most is when I get on a team and there's no project plan for onboarding or for a conference or whatever, because then it's really hard to make sure that everyone is on the same page. And they don't have to, if it's a small project, it doesn't have to be super extensive as far as your plan goes, but even just bullet pointing out key dates and items that you need to reach, that's absolutely 100% critical to success of any project or program that you're working on.
Yeah, that's really great advice. I need to do more of that. Jacob, how about you? What kind of tips do you have?
Yeah, I think just to kind of keep things snowballing here, the first thing that I want to do is flip the script on you, Paul, and say, what are you drinking on?
Project Management 101, I failed to read the instructions. I am about to open this Heavy Seas Loose Cannon. It's a somewhat local brewery near Baltimore. I'm based inside of DC. In addition to being able to get it regularly and inexpensively from the grocery store, we actually, my wife and I visited Heavy Seas last year for our wedding anniversary because my parents live kind of up that way. So when we drop off the toddler to get, some time away from him, as much as we love him, we're usually confined to that like Baltimore to Annapolis corridor. So last year we stopped here. It's really great. It's an IPA. It matches my long hair and beard. Thank you for reminding me that I didn't introduce myself.
Yeah, well, I didn't want you running off like a loose cannon. Sorry. Anyway, okay. Dad joke.
Dad.
No, I really like what Mark said, making sure that you've got your network in place. I don't think that enough of our time is spent when we think about not only in our current places of work, building relationships with our fellow employees that may have an expertise in a certain area, but also as you engage maybe in your local state society or ASAE or wherever it is that you're doing your networking, building not only for career advancement, making friendships, lifelong friendships and that stuff, but building a base of skill sets from others that you can lean on and go ask questions for. Or ask questions from. Like you think about for those who may be pursuing the C-suite one day, they need to build a network of those who are in the C-suite so that they can go ask questions, gain that collective wisdom. Well, in your current role right now, wherever that may be, maybe you're a coordinator, a manager, a director, wherever you're at, you need to be building both your skill sets horizontally and vertically by reaching out to members of your network. I think the other thing that I would hit on is I think about how going after certifications. I know, Mark, you said you're not going to be able to learn everything from a book, and I agree with that. But I think also being mindful of what certifications and things like that exist out there. For me, my CAE study helped me tremendously think about other silos inside the association space that I need to be cognizant of. It also helped me identify my weaknesses so that I can develop, in addition to what my employer sees from me, my own professional development plan and be intentional about seeking out those opportunities to become stronger in those areas. So when you think about budgeting, which is an area that I needed to develop as I went along, I had to reach out to others who had done that process before and think about an approach to that. The last thing that I would say is in terms of project management, make sure that when you're doing that you take time to pause and assess. It goes back to the planning that Lee was talking about, that you just need to make sure that you have a plan in place. It's also important not to do what we're so tempted to do often, like research, plan, implement, evaluate. That's often a process that we utilize. But it's important to, as you're going through that process, stop, pause, assess, take a look around. It's so easy to get very tactical and transactional and just work away. But by the time you look up, it's like an undertow or a current. It's pulled you down the beach. And so pausing and assessing, have a tool or process in place, whether that's technology or whether it's just old school, and make sure that you communicate that with members of your team to make sure that you're all using the same tool. Here's how you enter the data. Here's how you communicate this or give this update. Clear communications, I believe, are key to making sure that teams working on projects are going to be effective. And so you all have to be on the same page from the get-go.
Yeah, I just can't overstate or overstress the point that Jacob just made, to pause and take a breath. I was just reading a great blog in the New York Times recently about the value, the benefit of just doing nothing, right? Just taking like 10 minutes to just do nothing and just being like unashamed about it. You know, you're walking in, if you're hanging out in your office and somebody walks by and say, hey, what are you doing? I'm not doing anything. I'm just recharging. Like, you don't always have to be go, 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 go. It makes sense. Like, you just got to stop, recharge, scan, evaluate, do all that great stuff. So thank you, Jacob. That was a really great point. How about Sarah? What advice would you have for people getting into project and budget management?
Sure. So first, just a thought about the taking time to do nothing. I have a colleague who's actually started putting time on her calendar as thinking time, strategizing time. And so it really makes it so you have that time to sort of relax and be more creative and assess, just like Jacob said. So I think that is an awesome idea, which I've started to try implementing. I've been nodding my head a lot because I agree, and some of what everyone has been saying, I have verbatim in my notes. Lee, I also had don't be afraid to ask questions. I feel like that's how I like to build allies in my organization across departments and leaning on other people's expertise. I know I love when people come and ask me questions about our regional chapters or about building volunteer relationships. And it makes me feel like an expert. It makes me feel valued for my work. And so I feel like similarly, if you can go and ask the accountant about budgeting questions or others, I feel like it respects their expertise. But then you also get the information you need and you learn something in the process. So I think that is awesome advice. I also have about the planning and communications. When I was thinking about project management, those were the two big things that I thought are most important. So just echoing those, I think for planning, figuring out what works best for you. I love a good chart or spreadsheet and having those dates and deadlines, even if we're not going to meet all of the deadlines, or if it just, I need some kind of a framework to help me in managing the project and sharing that plan, like everyone has been saying, so that other people have the same expectations. So that would be the other thought I have here, is just along with that communication, which Jacob brought up, is to make sure you're communicating if a deadline's not going to get met, or if something's not going to happen the way you thought it was going to happen, allowing yourself to be flexible and to change plans as you go, but always clearly communicating if something's not going to happen in enough time to change, and setting those expectations from the beginning about what you need from other people, so that if you have to go back and enforce a rule, the rule exists. Because I always like to say you can't enforce rules that don't exist. And so, if a volunteer doesn't know that they're supposed to be doing something by a certain date, and now you all of a sudden do it, that's on you. You didn't tell them that. So try and clearly communicate expectations from the get-go so that you have something then to go back and enforce. And it just makes for a smoother project management experience. And people can feel like they're sharing in that success and sharing in, figuring out how to overcome obstacles and challenges. So those are my thoughts, and kudos to everybody. I agree with everything that's been said so far too.
Yeah, that is just a fantastic point. Is managing expectations is like one of the most important things you can learn.
Yes.
You're doing project management, budget management, personnel management, volunteer management, just being able to clearly communicate and manage expectations. And then I love your comment about being flexible. Like, that's what happens, right? Something goes wrong in a meeting, somebody
will.
Somebody drops the ball somewhere. It's gonna happen, right? And how do you react, and how do you communicate? And that's just such a great point. How about you, Emily? Do you have any tips or advice to round this off for us?
Yeah, so totally, agree with all my colleagues. And like Sarah, I was like nodding, like, yes, this is great information. Some, I guess, key takeaways that you guys can implement if you're new to budgeting. I think, talking to your supervisor and seeing what your budget is for your department. I think it's a great way to kind of get into the weeds, kind of understand, and then, when you feel more comfortable about that, seeing the full budget of the organization and seeing how that's affecting one department versus another one. So I think, not just your accounting person, but your direct supervisor can be a real big advocate. You just have to say, hey, I'm really interested in budget management. Can you walk me through our budget and see how your individual project is affected within that bigger scope, right? So that's something tangible that you can, implement today. and grow your skill set when it comes to managing full budget in the long run. Secondly, for project management, I love what everyone was saying. I think the whole timeline and having milestones, but really documentation, I think is a really key. And what I see a lot of problems is no one documents what they're doing. And so everyone's kind of like frenzied of, what should I be doing in this project? And there's recurring projects. So you don't want to reinvent the wheel. You could just build upon the successes that your colleagues have made. And so really being clear about that expectation and just being thoughtful in that project, I think goes a long way. And, when it comes to project management, I would say the setup is just as important with finding the solution and the implementation. You have to do your due diligence with finding all the background information, what's not working, what is working. You don't want a patch-up job. So really understanding what the main goal is and seeing what those issues are is really important. And so, just documenting and really being, thoughtful and strategic when it comes to the project at hand. So other than that, my colleagues give great advice.
Yeah, you had the unenviable task of being my question when everybody was just spitting fire all over the place.
I agree with everything.
I am curious. I heard this came up once or twice in passing, but this is an open question to the panel: is there a particular certification that you have gotten that has really just like taken you to a whole nother level in your ability to manage budgets or projects?
I mean, I hope to earn my CAE in the next couple of years, but I'm still working on getting enough credits to sit for the exam. So that's my big goal, and I know that that's an important accreditation to have. Otherwise, I'm not really sure. I have a couple books that I've thought of that I really wanted to share, but otherwise, no, I don't. Nothing comes immediately to mind for me.
Yeah.
I would say, just thinking about the CAE for me, and I mentioned this earlier, it just kind of opened my eyes. It allowed me to see into other departments that I'm not classically trained in, helped me identify the weaknesses that I had. But experience, as you know, is the best teacher. So when you kind of get thrown into it, you're quickly going to attempt to find out what are all the facts, what's all the information. I think budgeting was a good example for me. And what's really cool about the first time that you may be put in charge of doing a budget is you get to see literally where every dollar is going. Right. And you get to think okay, I want to apply my budget here, and here's why, and here's how I can do this effectively. And then, by that same standard metric, when you go over, it's a time for reflection. Why did I go over? What's the reason for that? Is that something that I should plan for in the future? And it makes you a better planner all the way around, from your projects to your standard ongoing projects. There's, in my case, be a communications plan. It could be an events plan. But it makes you better. And so it's an exciting opportunity. I don't know if I would say the CAE made me better at it, but it certainly helped open my eyes and make me aware beyond the silo that I'm in.
Right. And to add to what Jacob was saying, it's so much fun to see your budget and be under your expenses, but over in revenue. It's like a game. So it's always a fun thing to see, your measurable goals. And it's yes, I made it. And then when you don't, obviously, it's okay, I need to reassess what I'm doing to be more effective for my association. Because, ultimately, we want our association to thrive and grow. And so it's one of those skill sets that is really important, will help you throughout your career, regardless if you are a director or even a manager. Knowing your budget and how what you do affects it is really important.
Yeah, I agree. And the only thing that I'll add too is that I think when you actually, budgeting can sound really intimidating, but then when you actually get into your budget, it's you know, it's just being very practical and step by step, you know, figuring out how much and estimating well how much things are going to cost you, and figuring out, like Jacob and Emily were saying, like, where do you want to spend the money, where do you cut costs. So I think it's also having that willingness to ask questions and jump in, and recognizing that it's not rocket science. You'll be able to figure it out if you take it step by step and actually take the time to assess and really understand what you're looking at.
And Sarah, to your point, like the first time that I did one, it was an opportunity to go to my finance office and say, hey, I need to see these bills from these clients that we work with. And then it was an opportunity for me to say, well, could I find some cost savings here? Mm-hmm. It's really nice when you can go to your boss and say, I can save us some money here. So I don't know what you're going to do with all this extra money. But
that bonus.
It really is. It's a fun opportunity. And again, it goes back to just finding the time to pause, and which is the most difficult thing for me to do, because I get so tactical. I'm just like, I just fix this right now. But if you stop and pause, it's going to be a really fun experience.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I want to emphasize that I don't care how small your first budget is. My first budget for a project, not even for like a department or anything like that, was $2,500. But being able to kind of cut your teeth on some of those smaller amounts, but treat it still like you're working in a budget for the association or for a committee or for a department, because that's where you can, I don't want to say practice, but it's where you can really learn on some of those smaller dollar amounts, so that when you do get handed a department with a $250,000 budget, you're prepared for it as much as you can be.
Yeah, that's just fantastic advice. And as others said, I for those of you that are looking to take a deeper dive into budget or project management, there are definitely resources out there. Google is your friend. Like, check out some of those different courses, and from what I've learned from moderating a lot of these discussions with a lot of, like, for instance, fellows on in our last program, is just be a voracious reader, right? Read. And there are resources out there to help you develop a better understanding and a better comfort level with a lot of this material. And then if you can combine that with, like Jacob said, putting it into practice, you'll have a much more robust understanding. So just thanks, everybody. We're going to shift now a little bit into talking about managing people, because that's the fun stuff, right? We're going to get out of the boring budget talk. It wasn't, guys. You guys were great. But let's talk a little bit about managing staff. I'm going to start with Sarah. Talk a little bit about maybe some advice that you have as like a first-time manager of staff below you.
Sure. And so I'll start with this. I think when I'm thinking of managing staff or even managing volunteers, really just managing relationships that you have, I think it's about building trust. And so we talked a little bit about what does this look like now with so much technology that you can use. And so I would just say, I work in a remote office right now, and this is where I work pretty much every day. I go into once a week and see a couple of my colleagues, but that's it. And so building trust takes a lot longer when you are not physically with other people. And so I think that that's important to recognize if you're managing anyone, if you're managing volunteers who are across the country, or I know we were talking a little bit when we were preparing about consultants and others that you work with. And so giving yourself that time to really get to know someone as an individual and build that trust is really important. And if you're not physically in the same space, which is where I am right now, have to be really intentional about that communications. So it will not naturally happen. And if something's not getting done, you unfortunately don't have the option to just sort of pop by and say, hey, how's it going? Which used to be my favorite thing to do at my last association. You know, I love chit-chatting with people. I feel like you can be really disarming and start getting into a conversation and really talking about expectations. And so now working remotely, I really have to set up that time, really mostly with weekly check-ins, you know, having time to get to know people as people, recognize that everybody has things outside of work that are important to them. But I think it goes back to setting those expectations clearly from the beginning and then finding, we call them crucial conversations here or courageous conversations. So I think it's also about when things aren't going the way that you want them to go, your expectations are not being met, stepping up to the plate, being courageous and having that conversation time so that you can fix the behavior and giving people the benefit of the doubt that everybody wants to succeed and that sometimes some of the onus might be on you. Did you communicate it well the first time? Did you check in on progress? So I think finding ways where you can take that responsibility and seeing how you can, how you're showing up as a leader. So that's sort of what I focus on is building that trust and communicating effectively. And I think otherwise, if you're hiring good people or have great volunteers in place, they're going to want to succeed just like you are.
Yeah, that's such an important point, Sarah. And for those watching live or those checking out the recording later, like all of this advice that the panelists will impart on you today, like that can be utilized to direct reports, can be utilized to lateral reports. We're going to talk,
yes.
Hopefully we'll do a deeper dive into managing up and managing volunteers, but the whole establishing and managing and developing relationships is such a key point. I'm glad you brought that up. I saw a lot of smiling and nodding in the lower left-hand corner of my screen from Emily. And I think that she probably has some pretty good advice on this topic. So Emily, what is some advice that you would have in terms of just kind of general management of personnel?
I think Sarah, that was like the main, thing too, like clear expectations. I think goes a really long way. Also, having that conversation when you're new or the team member, kind of like your style of how you communicate, because not everyone's going to communicate the same way as you are, and you have to kind of adjust. And just being over communicative, I think is a long way. I think one thing that really helped me when it comes to managing people or me being managed myself is just kindness. Like be kind and respectful to one another of their projects and their time commitment. So don't make a meeting just to make a meeting. Be really intent and strategic in what outcomes you want to come out to that. So just being mindful about their time and the work that they're producing, because they're not going to just, do work just to do work. They want to be able to contribute, to feel like they have a voice. And so when you're setting those clear expectations, sharing with them, what are the goals? What are the metrics so that, it's not just do this. They see the kind of like that overview of let's align ourselves together. We're going together through this journey and this is where we want to go. Help me get there, right? We're working together to that mission. And so I think, really just being communicative and honest and just kind and nice goes a really long way in the long run.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's such a great point. Be humble, right? Be kind. I'm curious, Mark, I'm going to ask you next. Talk a little bit about your relationship and managing, vendors, if we brought up in the planning call. And I'm actually curious to hear your perspective if there are things that like maybe you've learned managing associates at a firm or just managing vendors that you can share with the group.
Sure. I think, just looking at it generally, the one thing that you shouldn't be doing in any sort of managing is winging it. ever, right? Never, never go off of your gut or sort of off anything else that probably wouldn't make sense for you to do in any other situation. It's really hard to come after these folks because everybody has really great advice. And so, instead of just going over the same things, I think the way that I can just put it just a little bit slightly different is just be purposeful in the way that you're communicating and interacting with your colleagues or with your customers or with your vendors. If you're a manager, make sure you know the policies and procedures of the organization, right? Once you're stepping into those types of roles, you really need to understand that you're more of a steward for those policies and procedures than before. And so, you're part of the governance structure that's in place that needs to be working in accordance with those rules. Vendor management is a lot different from customer management, which is a lot different from colleague management. And so, it's tough. I mean, I think all the folks around here would say these kinds of things aren't easy. And so that's why it's really good to sort of understand the boundaries of, under which you can operate in terms of these specific relationships, and then just be purposeful about how you're going about them.
Yeah. You guys, I'm really glad you were able to join this, Mark, because you bring a very important component to this. It's like we're talking about like a lot of relational development,
Sure.
and you're like, no, you need to follow the law, you need to follow the rules.
Well, yeah, I mean, the one area you can get in trouble, obviously, is if it's great to have friendships and close other types of close relationships in the work environment, but you also have to be mindful, right? That there's potentially laws that can apply, there can organizational policies that apply. So it's a little bit different than just sort of hanging out with your buddies.
Yeah.
And I'd like to add from what Sarah and Mark kind of combining it, those critical and courageous discussions. Like a lot of us, we don't want to be mean and we don't want to, sound critical. All you really have to do is be factual, right? Like don't put emotions into it. Just be like, for instance, you were late at this time. My expectation was you came in at 8 o'clock, you came in at 9:30. This is out of scope, or this is not part of our policy. Please communicate with me if there's anything that's happening. It's more of try to extract. We tend to put in our feelings of, I felt slighted that you didn't talk to me because I'm your supervisor and I should know these things. But just remove that and just be very factual of this is what happened, this is what my expectation is, and this is how we move forward in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And I did also, I loved what Mark said too about just that you are a steward. And I think that, in some associations, we are very, everybody's really friendly and it is a more relaxed environment. And I think a lot of us appreciate that about association work. But I 100% agree there need to be boundaries. And I think at the end of the day, especially if you're managing people, you have to have some boundaries there. I mean, they should not look at you as a friend. You can be friendly. I like to have that distinction so that if there are hard conversations that you have to have, that the respect is there and that, they see you as somebody who's always looking out for the interests of the organization rather than that relationship. So I do think it is like Emily said, it's a good balance between those two things. And I think it could be tough to find the right balance, but, live and learn. I think it just keeps coming with practice.
Mm-hmm.
And guys, don't be Facebook friends with your direct reports. They may be lovely people, but do not do it.
Don't do it. Just don't do it.
This is just fantastic. I'm gonna we shift over to Lee. Can you talk a little bit about some of your general management philosophy and some advice that you might have?
Yeah, so I actually first want to touch off of what Mark was saying. So hopefully at some point, especially as young professionals, you'll be given this opportunity to create a new policy or a new program or a new procedure. And it's very important at that time to make sure that you are very, very aware of any legal and governance structures that you have or that your association might be subject to. So, and so anecdotal, whatever the word is, as an example.
Water? Is that?
Yeah. As an example. So before my immediate position before this, I actually was put in charge of creating an entire division for a property management company that was association, homeowner and condo associations. And I know Jacob and I have kind of talked offline about this a lot, but there is a whole set of rules and laws and state laws and local laws that go into that industry that you have to be very, very careful about. And that was a bit of a unique experience for me because there were a lot of times where I did call our lawyer and say, hey, is this right? Can you just review this? And thankfully, you know, that we had a great contract with them, so it didn't cost us more money. But, you know, even just being able to make sure that you are aware of all of the different pitfalls that are out there for you when you're creating these programs. And ASAE is a great resource for that. But I would also say look into your industry specifics and make sure that you're following any guidelines that are necessary there. So that's just my little take on the legal side, having been there thoroughly in the weeds on that. Mark, thank you to your profession. And then going off of that, I know one of the things that Sarah had touched on earlier is she's a remote employee and manages remote employees as well. And I also had a remote team in my last position, and they were actually international. So making sure that you're working through those communication differences when it comes to different cultures, being sensitive to that and aware of those potential pitfalls again is very, very important. And because like in my case, I was in Seattle, they were in the Philippines. So daytime for me was nighttime for them. And making sure that, you know, again, your expectations are set and everyone's using the same technology and you're implementing the plans that are set in place. But also taking that time to step back and say, is this working? And making sure that you're connecting with your team and asking them questions too, because you never want to come off as the person who thinks that they have all the right answers. Be vulnerable, make sure that you're admitting when you mess up or when you don't know something, and make sure you're relying on them too.
Fantastic. Just great advice all around. I really appreciate that. So we talked a lot about obviously the nuts and bolts in these last 10 or 15 minutes, which is definitely very important. Do not understate how important it is to know the law and know the regulations and read the employee handbook and know how to manage from like a compliance perspective. But let's shift gears a little bit and let's talk about like being a great manager, right? Being a leader versus just being a manager. Let's talk about like empowering versus delegating. So I'm going to ask Jacob, why don't you tee us off? Why don't you talk a little bit about like being the best manager that you can be? How do you set your direct reports and others that you manage either directly or indirectly? How do you set them up for success?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, Paul. And I think it dovetails nicely with where the conversation was going from our previous call. I was going to bring up this example. At my current organization, when we are bringing on new employees, we have them complete a behavioral assessment. So it allows us to know more about how they work and how they'll respond in certain situations, both naturally and their adapted style. I find that beneficial just to know initially the kind of person I'll be working with. And so that gets right to the heart of the message, is just understanding the person as an individual, each and every person as an individual, recognizing not only as an individual, but their own professional. So one of the things that we're guilty of, and we harp on it as millennials, but I mean, you hear it across all age demographics, is, you know, we don't want to be just treated as millennials or boomers or Xers. Treat us as professionals. And I think that's what everybody deserves coming into the workplace. Mm-hmm. So whether you're managing someone who is younger than you or older than you, can we treat them like professionals and be professional as we do that? And I think that it demonstrates a skill set that is beyond any age perception that we would have about anyone in the workplace. And then in addition to that, getting to know that person's work style is going to be hugely beneficial. I am guilty, especially when I started management, of thinking that everybody works like me. I'm a big team player. Let's get everybody jazzed up, rah, rah, rah. And not everybody on the team is like that. Mm-hmm. So you need to understand that about the other team members. And then also just demonstrating that you care. Saying to that person that their ideas have value. My conversations, let me back up and just say that I've had the experience of being micromanaged, and then I've had the experience to be out there and fall your own weight, you know, if you mess up. And the second option is always way better. So, you know, when I'm having a conversation or coaching someone, and I call it coaching rather than correcting, to get them to demonstrate the behavior or lead to the result that I want, is I'm having a conversation that validates their ideas. I always tell my direct reports, and this is something that I had to learn to do myself when I report to my boss, don't bring me a problem, bring me a solution, and we'll talk about, you know, is this the appropriate solution in that situation? It gives them an opportunity to become a leader. It allows them to grow professionally, to take ownership over what they're doing in their job. And I think that that's so powerful, because it's way better if it comes off as their product and not yours. And you just get to take the glory of they did a great job in your management or your leadership. And that's just incredibly powerful. And, you know, when I think that those are some of the keys to leading versus managing, but you want to empower your employees to go achieve and do what they do best. One of my favorite things, and I was debating on whether to tell this story, is my dad hired somebody at his big management job that he had previously, and they came up to him and said, "My dad doesn't have a college degree. This person had a college degree." And he's like, "You know, I'm smarter than you. I have a college degree. I'm an expert in this. So what makes you think that you have any qualifications to lead or manage me?" And he goes, "Well, I hope that you're good at your job. That's why I hired you. Otherwise, if you're not good at your job, I'll fire you." And so that's a little bit lighthearted way of saying that we have to trust our employees to do the job that we hired them for, without stepping in and trying to tell them what to do. And then the final thing that I would say is, be purposeful with all of your communications, particularly when it's related to change. Where are we going? Be able to communicate why we're going there. What is the result? That's just part of managing change, but you have to manage that for the folks that you manage, and be able to say, here's where we're going, here's why we're going here, here's how it's going to benefit you, here's how it's going to benefit the entire organization. And we have to be able to do that with intentionality and specificity. Whether that's technology or any other type of change in your organization, I think that's something that you have to be able to do. You have to be able to tell that story.
Yeah. That's such a powerful, poignant obstacle, I think, that you've identified here, that it takes a lot of new managers and probably seasoned managers to get over, is whether you're managing a direct report or a volunteer or somebody within your organization, is like letting them fail at something that you've personally been very successful at, right? Having that like program or project that's like very near and dear, and just knowing that because you're either moving up or being reorganized for maximum organizational effect, that you may have to give up some of those things that you traditionally have like been passionate about and really good at, and just trying to put them in the best position possible, right? And if they fail, they fail, and they learn from it. So thank you, Jacob. That's really powerful stuff.
Well, I just think too, and I'll just add one more thought. This is particularly true from somebody stepping into the management role for the first time. You're going to go from doing something very tactical that you're good at to, as you say, Paul, letting somebody else do that job. And that's so hard. It's so hard because you're like, that's not how I want to do that. So here's one more piece of advice that I found when I am tempted to tell somebody how to do their job. I say, if you would like any advice on how I found, doing this to be the most successful way, I offer that. I say, or here's what I do in this situation. I'm not suggesting or asking you to do it. This is a way that I found to be successful. I want you to do the job the way that you're going to be most successful at doing it. And again, that's another empowering step. You're going to feel like they're in control of their work. They're not going to upset you by not doing it your way. But you've at least said, here's some experience and wisdom that I can bring to the situation if that's something that you're open to.
Yeah, definitely. Lee, what do you think? Talking about aspirational management and potentially some of the hurdles that you've overcome in being a remote manager, whether that's, again, a direct report or managing volunteers or managing laterally, what kind of advice would you have to impart on the group?
Yeah, I think obviously what Jacob was saying is very important, and something that I know I still struggle with is being able to kind of let go and say, no, like, this is your project, this is your system or whatever, and I have to give you that space to be able to figure it out. I'm here if you need me, but you need to be able to figure it out on your own too. So and I think that in a lot of ways, when we do that, we get a lot of great ideas out of our employees. And out of our, volunteers as well. And when we give them the opportunity to really step up and say, yeah, that is great that we've done it that way in the past, but what about changing it to this? And I think really being open to those suggestions and making sure that you are giving them that space to be able to empower themselves, as Jacob said. I think one of the difficulties and challenges with specifically working with remote employees, in my case, was they have they had a different background. So it was a lot of data management and database input and customer service call center type situation, and being able to make them feel comfortable enough to say, how about we try it this way, or give ideas for changes and feel empowered and set that level of trust, was something that was hard won, because you don't get that opportunity to just pop into the office and say, hey, how are you doing today? In a face-to-face conversation. At the same time, we have amazing technologies like Google Hangouts and all of this that really do step in there and fill that void a little bit. So I will say that technology is a wonderful thing when you're dealing with remote employees or volunteers. I actually recently, one of the things I implemented when I came into this role was running my committee meetings, not only by conference call, but by video chat as well. And yes, and that was a big change for these folks. So, but I'm getting good feedback. There have been some challenges, but I'm getting good feedback so far. So I really think that making sure that you're giving them that space, but also checking in with yourself and saying, no, I do need to step back and I need to focus on my projects and what that next step for me is, and overseeing from like a control tower rather than being on the ground in the weeds doing it.
Yeah, that's fantastic advice. And they did not pay me to say this, but for those of you that are working with remote employees or managing volunteers, Zoom is amazing. Again, they're not paying me to say this, so I don't.
We just switched to Zoom too.
Zoom is great. I would check it out. But technology is our friend, right? When we're handling these issues. I'm going to switch Emily again. Lots of smiling and nodding from the left-hand corner of my screen here. What advice do you have for the group that hopefully is still sticking around on this management?
Just to echo what Jacob and Lee has said, that letting go, but I don't mean letting go and just letting them like take everything, but like really empowering them and supporting them through that journey, whether that be giving them background information, how do you find the materials, that sort of thing. So, empowering them and giving them what is necessary in order for them to be successful, right? Is really key on that. I think one thing when it comes to leading and managing is just, leading by example. I think it goes a long way when I see my supervisor, putting in those hours, like no matter what the task is, that trickles down substantially. So seeing that work ethic and seeing, that care and that due diligence in the products that they provide, I think goes a long way and really creates that work culture of collaboration and teamwork and just, trusting each other to do the work that we need to do. And so, out of all the experiences and what we are hearing, it's really, be the best that you can be. Don't be afraid to ask questions and just, looking for the answers, not just for yourself, but seeing, what their goals are. How can you realign, their goals to the organization and how you can, help them, because yes, they may not be with you forever, but for that brief time, at least you can mentor them and shape, and make a difference in another organization that they will, take the lead on something. So regardless of where they are in their career, I think being a great manager and being a great leader lends itself to the bigger community of association management of creating creating that pipeline and giving that opportunity to others, because we can't do it alone.
I cannot thank you enough for making that point. That is such a pervasive theme throughout all the different topics that we have. It's just being the inspiration, right? Lead by example, right? Be the change that you wish to impart in the world. That is just such great advice. Thank you. How about Mark? Talk to us a little about what's your aspirational management style. I know you straddle. You have the association management experience. You got a law firm experience. You're such a wealth of knowledge for us. I'm just curious how you feel about aspirational management. What advice do you have?
Yeah, I would say it's great to have those sort of goals when you're trying to tackle, whether it's a vendor contract or working with your board or working with chapters or working with members. But I think the one thing that you want to keep in mind, and I talked about this before, is really being purposeful about how you're doing that. And so, one maybe tool or perspective that you can take is, try and put it in terms of if I were to have a contract for this particular situation, what are the questions that I would want to have answered right at the beginning, and what are the assumptions that I need to know are accurate and correct? Because part of winging it is saying, oh yeah, it's going to happen this way, or I think Jacob talked about people always him liking to do things certain ways and knowing that not everybody is like that. It's sort of figuring out where those things stand before you really get too deep into what it is, whatever it is that you're doing. And so if you think about a contract, obviously you're not going to have every single detail or deliverable that you're going to need from that relationship, but you're going to put in things that you generally expect. You're going to put in things like accountability, you're going to put in things like timelines, you're going to put in things like cost. And so if you sort of take that approach to a lot of these relationships or other things that you're trying to manage, I think you're off to a good start. Obviously, that's not a total answer, but I think it provides a good basis for how you want to proceed.
Yeah, no joke. That's a great blueprint. Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that with us. How about Sarah? What kind of advice do you have from like kind of an aspirational management lead versus managing, empowering versus delegating?
Sure. So a lot of nodding and smiling over here too with what everybody was been saying. I really agree with Emily about this idea of holding yourself to the high standards that you'd like to see from your team. And I think that's always, to me, the best advice. You can't expect others to go above and beyond if you're not doing it yourself. And so that's really important. I do agree with this idea of bringing solutions to the table and encouraging that as a culture. I will say, though, I think that there needs to be space for brainstorming solutions together. That you can't always expect. Sometimes there are problems, and if you have a great employee and they've been racking their brain to try and think of some solution, and they just can't, you want to be able to have that space for them to come to you with that too. Like that, I've been trying to figure this out, and I could really use your help. And so I think that you need some space there too, where we strive to always find solutions, but that we're a team and we can also come up with solutions together. And then just the idea of communicating again, and we've talked about this, where communicate in other people's language as best you can. If somebody really just wants to know what the end goal is and they're not big small talker, you might approach that differently than somebody who really values those in-person time to get to know you. So that I think is managing across the board. If you can speak the other person's language, know what's important to them. As somebody who manages a lot of volunteers and also in a small organization where you're always working cross-departmentally, my goals for what I want to see the regional chapters do will not always be the same as what the communications team wants to see happen or our effective practices team wants to see happen. We all have the organization in mind, but our individual goals might be different. So if I can show them that we're actually helping their team by doing this, then that will go a lot further than me just trying to show what's important to me. So that'd be my advice. I also recommend highly Emotional Intelligence 2.0. That was, I was thinking about this. I was like, that's been helpful to me. There are going to be times as a manager where you're going to be passionate about something. And so learning to channel that energy well is important. So you can always show up, as best you can. So trying to find, like you said, reading, trying to find resources to just help you personally will also help you professionally.
Yeah. So much sage advice from this group. I wish we had like 2 more hours to talk.
I agree.
But again, I do think that for what we learned from our previous conversation with the fellows, from what we've learned from our guests today, is reading and preparing and taking advantage of the wealth of knowledge and skills and experience that this community provides is just, it's invaluable, right? You need to read, you need to connect with your peers, you need to attend annual meeting, you need to be active and collaborate and really leverage this group of people. So again, I wish we had 2 more hours to do this, but unfortunately we don't. But I do we like to end with some takeaways. So for me personally, I think a few of the really big takeaways are seek certifications, right? If you're unsure and you want to strengthen an area of your practice or even want to just benchmark an area of your practice, Explorer certification? Do you want a project management certification? Do you want the CAE? Do you want, I actually don't know that many other certifications, but they exist and they're out there. If you want industry certifications to better connect with the people that you manage, whether it's direct reports or volunteers, like really look into that, build trust, right? Be humble, be kind, be personable, be genuine with anybody that you work with as you're managing all different sides and all different axes, right? Because we're managing 360 degrees at this point in our careers. And then again, aspirational management, right? We want to. It's not enough just to delegate. Yeah, you can skate by and you can delegate, but can you really like empower your people? Can you give up those passion projects that you've been working on for 5 years, 10 years that you would never trust like your grandma to do? Like, can you really trust somebody new? Yeah, you can, right? You can do it. You can develop the plans, you can develop the timeline, you can delegate, you can communicate, you can do all that great stuff. So I'm done talking, but I want you guys to know as you're listening to this later, engage with us and collaborate, attend the annual meeting, if not this year, next year, attend, like get into ASAE, like get to know the collaborate groups, like really lean on your peers, because there are a lot of other young professionals and Gen Xers that are like in this space that have done this before and they've like leaned on each other. So thank you again to all the panelists that were here. There was just so much good stuff. Again, for the third time, I wish we had like 2 more hours to talk about this stuff, but we don't, and everybody's got stuff to do. But thank you, everybody. I hope you'll join us next time when we do a Drinks and Discover, and have a good evening.
Thanks, Paul.